Happy Mother's Day, and we're going to be talking about some courageous women of the Bible. There's 9 of them that we're going to talk about that are listed on your paper. I do have answers for you later on, and I do have a booklet for you to take home to share with whoever. The stories of the women that we're going to talk about today, many of you have heard them before. They're interesting women, they're courageous women, they're mothers, they're sisters, they're wives, and they have some interesting stories. And more than that, more than the interesting stories, are the lessons to be learned. That's pretty much what we look at when we look at Old Testament, New Testament. What does it tell for us today? What does it talk about God? How does He impact our lives? And these women sort of show what's going on there. So if we can start with prayer. Glorious God, you love us and care for us and all our needs. Thank you for this time to visit some stories of women you knew long ago. Today we give thanks for our mothers and for all the women in our lives who love us and care for us like mothers. We pray that you will bless them and all that they need. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. So, the Bible mentions 187 women by name, and that was just really shocking to me that there were so many, but hundreds of others nameless and described as daughters, wives, mothers, as I just said. From these women we can learn valuable lessons. We see God's pattern for godly living in these women. Many of the women in the Bible are best known for their relationships, so it's not just who they are, but it's who they married, as you know, by looking at this list, who they married and who they mothered. So that's probably one of the things we want to talk about. Lessons about parenting and marriage. They certainly had some interesting marriages, and they also had some interesting children. So and their parenting patterns, left some things to be desired. One of the messages of the Old Testament is that God prepares great women and mothers who teach great lessons and demonstrate what it truly means to be great Christians. The 9 women that you see on your paper, 8 of them are from the Old Testament, and one of them, as you can tell, is from the New Testament. She's one of my favorites, although not named, because she truly, when she has this encounter with Jesus, her story really shows who Jesus is and how he shows compassion and how he wasn't afraid to go where nobody else went before. One of the basic lessons seen in each woman's life is the consistency of cause and effect. She would have done something happened to her, and then there was an effect on what she did. Simple faith results in God's care. The right action in a crisis exhibits a kind of courage that God honors. These women, for the most part, were ordinary women. There were no, one of them was a queen, but they were sort of just the people who lived at the time. They had amazing freedom to act, however, which is something unusual for women at that time. But whatever their limitations, they made choices, acted on behalf of others. They prayed, most importantly, they prayed and took initiative. So 9 women from the Bible. Why? Why am I doing this? Why am I talking about only 9 women when there's 187 and more? Well, this picture that you see there is a Woman of the Bible quilt. And I first got introduced to that in my quilt guild. Denise Sanders, one of our people who comes to church, made this quilt. There's an Old Testament quilt and a New Testament quilt. But as you research Women of the Bible quilt, you'll see there's lots of other quilts from the Bible. So I saw this quilt, and then as a part of Christian Ed Committee, you're asked to do something. You're not just on the committee for good looks. So you have to do something. So I thought, well, what could I do with this quilt? It's fascinating. What could I do with this quilt and also something for adult Sunday school? So I thought, well, if I picked a few women that we could talk about, and not so many, we could get through the Sunday school program. And also, I've been working with the girls at the Survivor House at Sailor Freedom. So I thought, what an opportunity this would be to pick 9 women, to make 9 blocks, not all the blocks that you see there, but only 9, and turn it into a quilt, and then have Pastor Kathy bless that quilt, take it up to Sailor Freedom, teach them what I'm going to show you today, and then hang that quilt in the living room of the Survivor House, because over the French doors in that room, they have a plaque that says Siesta Chapel, as some of you know. So how was I going to make this quilt and do this lesson, you know? So in talking with Denise Sanders, she said, I'll help you. And I thought, well, that's good, because I don't know too much about quilting, and she would help me. And her idea of helping was to make those quilt blocks. So these are 5 blocks that she has already made. Hagar, Rebecca, Naomi, Miriam, and Sarah. So we will take these, put them together. They will have borders in between them, as you see there. They will have borders in between them. They will have a large border on the outside. Don't know if it's going to have grape leaves, but they'll have a large border on the outside. And then I'm going to take it up to Alma Sue's, the Amish quilt shop, and have them quilt it for me. Then off to Sailor Freedom with what you're going to see today. The stories are interesting. They come from Bible passages. I've given you all the Bible passages, so in your free time, you might go back and take a look at the actual writing from the Old Testament and the New Testament. The girls have Bible study classes, so this is not going to be anything new to them. And also, they listen to Christian music a lot, so I just had this picture of, the Christian music playing in the background, and sort of talking with the women about these women. So obviously I had to pick some women who were not too controversial, thinking of where I was going with survivors from the sex trafficking. So because a lot of people said, did you pick this woman or did you pick this one? Oh, no, I didn't, because that one, I wasn't too sure. I just wasn't sure. I had to be really sure of what was going on. So the first woman that I'm going to talk about today is Ruth, and obviously you see that the Bible reference, she has her own book. She and Esther are the only 2 women that have their own book. Ruth is famous for many reasons. You're going to see a poem that she said there. It's they call it the Song of Ruth, but she was a Moabite woman from a country, one of Israel's enemies, the traditional enemies to Israel. She was an outsider, but she married an Israelite and joined the family while they were living in Moab. Ancestor of King David and Jesus, so that's why she becomes important. After Ruth's husband and father-in-law died, her mother-in-law Naomi decided there's nothing left for them there. She had no alternative to return to her homeland. But there was another daughter-in-law and Ruth, and they said, Ruth especially said, look, I don't want to leave you, I want to go with you. And this is her famous song of Ruth. But Ruth said, do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus, and so to me, and more as well, even if death parts me from you. Very famous, and lots of poets. Whither thou goest, I will go. Lots of poets have had a take on that. So Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, leave, and they go back to Bethlehem. And they get there, and they're destitute. They have nothing. So Ruth decides at this time, there was a harvest, and I think we talked about that someday, but anyhow, there was a harvest, and in order to get some food and get somewhere, she joined the harvest. And I learned a new word when I read this. It's called gleaning. That gleaning was a form of charity for the poor. I had never heard this word before. They walked behind the harvesters and they gathered what was left. Now, many of you may know that, but I did not. So whatever was left was for them. So Ruth goes to this field of Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi. That's why they went there, because she had somebody that she could count on. And he was single, an ideal match. And Naomi, had her antenna up and said, yeah, maybe this is good. And being a relative was even better. So he was respected, rich, and they maybe had an obligation to help Naomi. Not long before Boaz came to the field, he saw the harvest was going, and he took a look at Ruth and said, yes. Love at first sight, if that be the case. She may have been the only nice-looking one around, I don't know, but who knows. But Naomi, now, she's got to figure out a way to get these two together. So she devises this plan, and she says to Ruth, now look it, he's going to sleep on the threshing floor tonight. You should go there and be with him. So we don't talk about what happened, but they spent the night together, and that's, I had to do Ruth and Naomi, but, and I know they were, this was a little sensitive part for me to take up to Selah, but they know what we're talking about anyway. So he wakes up the next morning, and now she spent the night, and there's some obligation. So Boaz proved as good as his word, and he and Ruth were married. They had a son called Obed, and Naomi cared for the child who would grow up to be the grandfather of King David. So lessons to be learned, and these are, we're going to talk about Naomi next, but these are some lessons to be learned from here. Fred, can you see that? Do you want to read that part?
God is concerned about all people regardless of race, nationality, or status.
So no matter who they were. Next, Fred.
God uses little things to accomplish great plans. God rewards faithfulness. Thinking of others and their needs above oneself is noble. Your elders can be a great source of wisdom and encouragement.
And that's for sure. For Ruth, her mother-in-law was her best friend. And Ruth, the faithfulness that Ruth had, staying with Naomi when Naomi had to leave, when there was nothing for them, Ruth could have stayed. If she was pretty, she may have been able to find another husband right where they were, but instead she left and went with Naomi. So on to Naomi. Now that is the patch for Naomi, so I included them there. Denise has her own color scheme. I did not pick any color scheme in it. I'm sure it will all go together beautifully, and you will all see it before. So we need to talk, although we know what Naomi did, we're going to still talk about Naomi because she is an important character, and there's more in this part than in the other part. So Naomi, we know that she was a married woman. She had 2 grown sons. But what happened to her is that she was very well off, but her husband dies, her sons die, and that's what happens. That's what makes her destitute. She gets nothing. She gets no lands. Her husband owned all the lands. They received nothing. So she really had no choice except to leave. But they set off on their journey for Naomi's home. Now, the whole town seems to come out because they knew Naomi, and they come out to see her. But she's gotten old by this time, and as it said, the years were etched on her face, and she's probably not as pretty as she used to be. And she's kind of bitter about that, but she says, what are you going to do? The years have been unkind to me, I've lost everything. But she knows that the solution to her problem, being that she's old and probably not very attractive, is to get a husband for Ruth. That is her salvation, because Ruth will share then everything with her.
And she cooks.
Can she cook? She might. She might. That would be her salvation. That's, well, and if he was attractive, you know, right, he would want somebody who cooks. Okay, so we go through this Boaz and we talk about him again. He notices Ruth and he says to his workers, leave her alone. Don't hassle her. I like her. Leave her alone. Let her gather the grain. And then there's more of the threshing floor and how Boaz met. He didn't just say, okay, I'll marry with you. He meets with his council of elders and they hammer out the details of the marriage. Story ends with the best news of all. Again, one who once had been bitter, now she's got her grandson, and you know that what that can do when you hold your first grandson or when you hold your first child. Things change within you, and this is what happened to Naomi. So Obed becomes the father of Jesse, who is the father of King David. Mary Jane, can you read that for us? Though we
go through difficult times in our lives, God is willing and able to make sure that your life story ends well.
And isn't that the truth for both of them? That God took care of them, Naomi, giving up all, and also Ruth, who went ahead with her mother-in-law. So on to Rebecca and wives and mothers in the Bible. Genesis talks about Rebecca, and probably this is a good place to tell you that this whole slide program is reproduced for you. So you will get a copy of it before you leave, along with the answers to these questions if you haven't figured them out already. My hope is that you share this, and why we took the time to do that, that you share this with other people that you know, members of your family, and it gives you an opportunity to go back and say, I didn't know about Rebecca, and I can't remember from what Shirley said, it's too fast or whatever. So this gives you a chance to go back and just read those stories. They are so important. So Rebecca, remember for her kindness, she becomes the wife of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. And beginning books of Genesis 24, and you can read all those scriptures at your leisure. Though blessed with love, Rebecca's life was not blessed with children like many other women in the Bible. They were wonderful women, they had great husbands, but they were not able to conceive. She had great faith, great energy. She pleaded with the Lord to have a child, as I'm sure they all did, as I'm sure a lot of women who are childless today plead with and pray to conceive and to have a baby. And they waited on the Lord to fulfill his promise. As you know, the covenant with Abraham, was such that, that was going to happen. But barrenness in the old world was not looked upon kindly. They thought that if you couldn't have a baby, then there was to be something wrong with you, you may be sinful, and you would not have God's blessing. So the years of waiting show that God had his own time for fulfillment. He knew when she was going to have this child. She did not follow the shots, although she did pray and pray and pray. So she becomes the mother of twins, and we've heard those names before, Jacob and Esau, and she changes, like some mothers do. The opposite character of her twins brought into focus another side of their mother. There was a difference on the regard on the part of Isaac and Rebekah toward the two sons. Isaac favored Esau, as you probably remember, and Rebekah favored Jacob. And then the two twins, they are constantly in conflict. Esau, the firstborn, should have inherited everything. But Rebekah, because she was so favored by Jacob, convinced him that Jacob should be the one. So she and Jacob, they tricked Isaac into giving the leadership to Jacob. Now Isaac is enraged, he was betrayed, and he planned to kill, because that's what they did in the old world. But Rebekah stepped in and helped Jacob to escape. Lessons to be learned. Maria, maybe, can you see?
Yep. Showing favoritism can create devastating problems between people.
Oh, and yes it can, as we all know.
Trying to do a good thing by evil means is wrong. Spiritual blessings may be had only through spiritual means. Deception and lying can only lead to further godlessness and will not lead to lasting happiness.
And lastly,
We must trust God in all circumstances.
and as you read through and reread through, I hope that you will see other lessons that are taking place in these stories and other lessons that you might want to write in the spaces that I have left. And my email is in the directory, and if you so desire, I would be very pleased to have you add to this list, because again, this is going from here up to Salem. So if you see something else that you would like to put in, please email me and let me know. So now we go to Hannah. These pictures that you see, I just Googled the names of women in the Bible, and there will be a whole bunch of pictures of Hannah, a whole bunch of pictures of Ruth. So, you know, I just picked, obviously they are depictions and not real photographs. So we move to Hannah. Hannah was a young woman married to a man called Elkanah. He loved her and she loved him, but he had a wife, another wife, as many men did. There was, you know, that system in the old world, Peninnah, and not lost so much, but remarkably fertile. So here she was able to conceive many children, and yet her husband, you know, was not enamored of her. Children were her glory, and they should be the apple of her husband's eye. All these children, and wonderful, and wouldn't it be great? But they didn't, because he was in love with Hannah, even though she was barren. Peninnah tormented Hannah about the lack of children. You can imagine two women, and one's got all these children, and she's, you know, she's supposed to be the best. She's got all these children, and here's Hannah, who she knows her husband cares about, but yet, you know, can't have any children. So this goes back and forth for years, especially at those times. Hannah prayed for children. She went to the shrine at Shiloh, and she prayed for children. She vowed that if God gave her a son, she would give the son back to God by dedicating him as a Nazarite, a holy man sworn to serve God all his life. And at this point, we could probably say, be careful what you pray for. Because what happened then is that she ended up having a child. So Eli, priest, blessed her and prayed that her request might be granted. There is a long song of Hannah. You may have heard of that. That'll be listed in the Bible. He hears this song, and he feels sorry for her. His words seem to have a profound effect on her. She was convinced she would conceive, and indeed she did. She is the mother of Samuel. Many of you know Samuel. Prophet of God, a judge, and a leader in the nation of Israel. When the time came that the little boy was weaned, obviously she took him to Shiloh just as she had promised. And I think it probably was very hard for her, except that she dedicated the boy to God's service in a special ceremony. And at this stage, God could have said, no, that's okay. You're here, and you're going to do what you said you were going to do. That's okay, you can keep him with you. But that didn't happen because there was a plan. So she stuck to her original intention. At the time, Hannah made a special prayer of thanksgiving. This is the song of Hannah that has special significance for us. the Magnificat spoken by Mary, the mother of Jesus, and recorded in Luke's Gospel, you can look that up, is modeled on the Song of Hannah. But that's not the end of the story. Hannah doesn't just leave her son and move on. She used to visit him at Shiloh every year, taking special gifts that she had made, and wearing a garment that she had made. Samuel marked Samuel as a priestly status. She was blessed with more children as time went on, and there's no more mention of her husband. Lessons to be learned. Who can see that? Mary, can you see?
Sure.
God does.
God does indeed hear and answer the prayers of those who come to Him in faith.
One more.
In the life of Hannah, we see that God knows our story from beginning to end, that everything has a purpose, and that trust in Him is never misplaced.
And that's probably the story here. He knows from beginning to end what's going to happen. And although she could have taken her son back, she didn't. And everything has a purpose, and the trust in God that we have is never replaced. On to Miriam. Now Miriam goes way back into Exodus because she indeed is the sister of Moses. So we know, and we've seen Miriam because we've seen the Ten Commandments on TV. And so we know who she is, and we know her story. But there's parts of her story that I didn't know, maybe you didn't know. Again, when we know of the baby in the bulrush. So when Pharaoh decrees that, the boys, the baby boys have to be killed, Amram and Jochebed put baby Moses in a waterproof basket and set it on the river and attempt to save his life. But Miriam was watching. And when the daughter of Pharaoh saw the baby and took it in, Miriam suggested to her, well, we got this little baby. We need somebody to take care of it. And lo and behold, Mary's quick thinking meant that Moses was brought up by his own mother. So, we've seen that before. The next account of Miriam is with her brother Aaron. They were with Moses throughout the 9 plagues. And Miriam was not just tagging along. She was Moses' collaborator with leadership responsibilities. So we remember her for, yes, saving Moses' life, but remember her as one of the women, the great women leaders of the Bible. She came out of Egypt with Moses. She became the leader of the Hebrew women. And that was probably another important part, that she was the leader of the Hebrew women. Okay, so escaping from Egypt, and on one occasion, now she's got another song, and it's the Song of Miriam, one of the few poems that survived from the ancient world. When the story goes, when they were leaving, and the waters parted, Moses parted the water, and Pharaoh and all of his soldiers were coming after them. This is what she had to say: "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown to the sea." And of course, that's one of the big famous Ten Commandments scene when Pharaoh and I don't know if Pharaoh was drowned, but certainly his men were drowned. Unfortunately, later on, Miriam starts to get a little haughty, and she starts to rebel against the leadership of Moses. She and her brother, try to say, what's going on with him. And Moses doesn't do anything to help it, because now he marries a woman from another nation. And the Hebrews condemned marriage to a foreigner. So this really got the hair up on her back. She and her brother began to question Moses' authority. Together, they tried to usurp Moses' authority, but in doing this, they endangered the unity and future of the entire nation, as we know. But Moses, again, remained calm, and God intervened. Miriam was punished and became a leper for 7 days. So that was her punishment. Good thing it wasn't forever. But She suffered the punishment of God, but she atoned for her challenge to Moses' authority. She continued searching with Moses for the promised land. Miriam was a natural-born leader who stumbled and fell, but because of God's forgiveness, her leadership was restored and her influence continued. Lessons to be learned. I like this saying. When she messed up, she stepped up. And that's really a good lesson to be learned. When you mess up, step up. She made mistakes, but she was more than her mistakes. She left a good name, a great name, and an enduring legacy. She's one of the most important women in the Bible. She's mentioned in more books than any other woman, and she's the only woman to have her childhood, adulthood, old age, death, and burial recorded in the scriptures. Lesson to be learned: when we fail, we can seek God's restoration and thank Him for His forgiveness, which I'm sure she did after becoming a leper, because we know what a bad thing that is. On to Esther, Esther the queen. The setting of Esther's story is in ancient Persia during the 1st century, and the Jews are in captivity. When King Ahasuerus' wife refused to show off her beauty at a banquet, she was banished, and he looked for another wife. So how bad was that? So a young Jewish girl, again they are in captivity, but a young Jewish girl was chosen. Her name was Esther, who had an uncle Mordecai, but nobody knew that they were related or that they were Jews. That was the most important part. Mordecai was in the king's favor because he had once saved the king's life, but Mordecai had an enemy, a powerful man named Haman. He hated the Jews as they would bow only to God. He kept talking to them and they were not going to give up. So discovering that Mordecai was Jewish, Haman fed the mind of the king with ideas about people who were different. Under his influence, the king decides to execute all the Jews, not realizing, of course, that Mordecai and Esther are Jewish. Mordecai went to Esther and said, "You've got to do something to save your people." She didn't want to because she knew if she went to the king without being summoned, that she would put her life in danger. She was not allowed to do it unless she was summoned there. But she gathered her courage, she prayed, dressed in her most splendid finery, and she went to the king's throne room, and fortunately, because he loved her and she was beautiful, he embraced her. She invited him to a special banquet where, of course, he would be the guest of honor and Haman could come as well. So the plan is in the mix. But meanwhile, Haman is going to execute the Jews, remember. So he's erecting the gallows while the banquet's going on. And so the king promised Esther anything she wanted. She asked that her life be spared and her people be saved. And he's like, "Well, what? What are you talking about?" And now she's telling him, "Well, I'm Jewish, Mordecai is Jewish, and now you're going to kill us all." So Haman, being the bad guy, he was tricked. He was taken out and hanged from the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. And here is one of the interesting things about the story. The Jews were not only saved from death, they could attack those people who had been their enemies and claim their property. On the very day that they were to have been annihilated, they turned the tables by destroying all those who sought to kill them. Thousands were killed, including the 10 sons of Haman. From that day on, the Jewish people kept the day as a special festival called Purim. So that's news to me too. That's where that came from. You know, and again, you can say, well, wait a minute. You know, they were supposed to be killed and now they're killing. So, but that is the old world. That is what happened. We know that that goes on. So God has a plan for our lives. We've seen that for many of these women. We're given divine moments to alter circumstances. We must stand with courage. Prayer brings clarity and hope for deliverance. And don't we know that? And God uses everything and everybody for His divine purpose. On to Sarah. Sarah. More space is devoted to Sarah than anybody in the Bible. She was a wife, a mother, a paragon of faith. She's the matriarch of the tribes of Israel, their founding mother. Sarah's life, again, blighted by lack of a son in a society where people were measured, their worth was measured by their fertility. Now Sarah becomes impatient, and she decides to have her slave, Hagar, bed down with her husband, and so the result of that was that Hagar bears a son called Ishmael. And now Sarah despised Hagar even more. They two women were jealous of each other. But God, as you know, came to Sarah's rescue, and at 90 years old, she conceives a son, and she became the mother of Isaac, who, as you know again, is the son of the covenant, who was to bear a son named Jacob, whose name God would change to Israel, and he was the progenitor of an entire nation. So she becomes the mother of the Jewish nation. Threatened by the presence of Hagar, Sarah has them expelled into the desert, but God saves them. They would have died of thirst if God had not saved them. And there's a legend that Sarah dies of a broken heart at 120, if you can imagine that. And Abraham's hand had been restrained by the angel, that he now knew that Abraham was willing to give up his only son. Despite everything that human beings do, the plan of God unfolds as God meant it to. God works on his timetable, not ours. Patience is one of the most crucial lessons to be learned. The next story is the story of Hagar, and again, I put this in because I do want to talk to the girls about it, but we already know. We've seen the story of Ruth, and we know what happened, but there's a little more to Hagar's story, a little bit more background in this message of it, quite long, so it'll be interesting to see what the girls think about that. And more lessons to be learned, divine purpose in the life of everyone, no matter how obscure and friendless. Every person who in need, who calls out to God, will be answered. God's grace is abundant, and we can find safety, security, and hope. Now I put this in because this is going to show you, if you didn't know already, the tree of life of how we ended up with Jacob. We ended up with Isaac and Ishmael, and from the line of Isaac we go to Jacob on the left-hand side, and that becomes all the Jews and their prophets. And from Hagar, whose son is Ishmael, we go to the Arabs, and then we end up with Muhammad. So that's how we have the split between the Jews and the Muslims. Last of all is a Samaritan woman, and again, her story. She goes to the well. She's a woman of ill repute. She goes to the well. She's had several husbands. She meets Jesus, and of course, he's not supposed to be talking to her, a woman. He's not supposed to be in Samaria, another thing. And he's not supposed to ask somebody for a drink of water. But in this whole story, she comes to the well, and Jesus said, well, I can give you living water. Which, again, the women's circle, we talked about the Samaritan woman this month. So she would never thirst again. Jesus uses the words living water to refer to eternal life, the gift that would satisfy her soul's desire and only available through him. She didn't fully understand it, but she's saying to herself, this man has never met me, he knows my whole story, what was going on, so he definitely had her attention. They talk about the Messiah coming and what was going on, and Jesus said, I who speak to you am me. So now she knows that this is the Messiah. She leaves the well, she leaves the well, she goes back and talks to her people, and we have heard ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. Lessons to be learned. No one is too sinful to be saved, and this is, again, one of the reasons why I like this. No one is so lost that the Lord cannot find him. No matter how lost you feel, the Lord will find you. No one can be saved without facing your sinful past, and no one who faces a sinful past will be turned away by Jesus. This is your paper, and here are the answers. Okay, I do have a sheet up here, but we can go through here. So Ruth is the faithful widow. Hagar is a slave girl who is the mother of Ishmael. Rebecca is a kind woman who is the mother of Jacob and Esau. Miriam is the natural leader, the sister of Moses. I know that one. Naomi, again, goes with the influential mother-in-law. Sarah is the founder of the tribes of Israel, wife of Abraham. And so Hannah, she's the one who gave up her son to God. Esther is the queen. She's the only queen that we really saw today. And of course the Samaritan woman who encountered Jesus at the well. Thank you, everybody. I do have a handout if you would like it. The whole booklet is there. I do have some other papers if you want to take them. Again, you have my email and directory. If you think of anything you'd like to share so that it would make more meaning to take up to Sailor Freedom, that would be fine. And I found a prayer for mothers that I would like to close with today. Our loving God, we give you thanks and praise for mothers young and old. We pray for young mothers who gave life and count toes. We tend to our every need. May they be blessed with patience and tenderness to care for their families and themselves with great joy. We pray for our own mothers who have nurtured and cared for us. May they continue to guide in strong and gentle ways. We remember mothers who are separated from their children because of war, poverty, or conflict. May they feel the loving embrace of our God who wipes every tear away. We pray for women who are not mothers but still love us and shape us with motherly care and compassion. We remember mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers who are no longer with us, but who will live with us forever in our memory and nourish us with their love. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.